Welcome to week 7. We're almost there. This week's issue is, do we need to curb global warming? And I decided to take a different approach. Imagine that. Seems like I've done that every week. But rather than to get into the specifics of whether or not we need to curb global warming, I'll leave that to the book. What I wanted to talk about is what philosophy do we derive our way of thinking about this particular subject. You'll notice that there's some themes that, as we go through these, there are only 3 or 4 slides on this, but each one of these really harkens back to earlier slides, and you should see certain themes begin to come out through these discussions, and my hope is that you'll begin to see where you fit philosophically and how that philosophy puts you in a position of deciding one way or another on a particular position. I'd also hope that you don't let that philosophy prevent you from being able to make a completely independent decision as well. But let's look at this, the free market approach versus the government assistance approach. The free market has 2 aspects to it that come into play on global warming. One is that the consumer will decide what company to support or what companies to support. So if consumers decide that a highly polluting company that they should not be supported, then they simply won't buy from them, and that company will either choose to change their ways or they'll simply go out of business. Another factor of the free market would be that some entrepreneur or entrepreneurs will decide that there is money to be made by being green, and we've seen that to some extent already. The question is, will that process happen quickly enough and fast enough in order to make a difference that the scientists who are worried about global warming, that they believe needs the rate that needs to be used to get that done? So that would bring in the question, maybe government needs to come in and take care of the problem. I guess you could look back on slavery and racism and all of those kinds of things and wonder, is it fair for anyone to undergo discrimination or to be traded as a slave while you wait for the free market to work itself out? That's a question for you to decide. You may also recall earlier we talked about constitutionalism. This was in the original intent week, versus representative democracy. Those who come from a constitutionalist side would say that the government needs to be very, very limited, and that it cannot be trusted to come in and tell us what's right or what's wrong in terms of our environmental policies. And that's that big government knowing what's best kind of thinking, versus a representative democracy where we trust the process of democracy as working and able to help us work through a solution to the problem of global warming. And that brings us to our final slide, American exceptionalism. We like to think at times that we are exceptional, that we're outside the norm, that we represent what's best in humanity. Yet when it comes to some of the treaties that we've been asked to sign, we have balked because nations like China or India or Brazil are not maybe doing as much as they should. And why are we doing all the work? Well, it begs the question, if we really are exceptional, doesn't that apply in this circumstance, or are we exceptional only when it is something that we want to do? And I'm not trying to answer that question for you, but with all of these 3 things, free market versus government intrusion, I guess you could say, or government help, representative democracy where you have a process that we trust versus a clear cynicism of government, and whether or not Americans are exceptional, all of these things could play into your way of thinking about issues, including this one, whether or not we need to curb global warming.